So, a little while ago, during the lead up to the release of Sonic X Shadow Generations, there was actually a cross-promotion shadow manga released in Japan in the publisher CoroCoro Comics magazine, and it was made by Yuki Yamada, and it went over fairly well. People seemed to really enjoy it. Me personally, I didn't really get around to reading it, but I thought it was cool. At the time, I didn't really think much of it, except now we have a brand new Sonic the Hedgehog manga titled Sonic and the Blade of Courage. And this is not tied into any sort of video game or anything like that. It is its own standalone manga release telling an original story, and it's got me real curious. And even though it's only the first chapter that's released, people are absolutely loving this thing. I'm seeing people on Twitter calling this like peak Sonic media, the best Sonic story. Oh, we're so back. And so I figured I'd read it and give my little review of the first chapter of Sonic and the Blade of Courage. I should probably give a little disclaimer though. This manga has not been officially released in English yet. CoroCoro Comic is currently working on an English translation of this comic as well as the previous Shadow Generations manga. So what I read was a fan-translated version of the first chapter. And that doesn't mean that it's inaccurate, it just means that there might be differences in this and the official translation when that comes out. Also, please support the official translations when they do come out. If we want more cool stuff coming out of Sega Japan, like the Sonic manga and, you know, potentially even a Sonic anime at some point in the future, maybe based on this manga, you're gonna want to support the official release when it happens, so just putting that out there. With all that said, let's jump straight into Sonic and the Blade of Courage, and the first thing that we're met with in this brand new manga series is a young boy, an elementary schooler named Yuta. Yuta is a pretty normal kid, you know, he tries to help people wherever he can, and he just likes being nice. And you know, some of the other kids, they bully him for being a little bit slower than the rest of them because he's always taking his time to help people. But he's a nice kid. Yuta is then kidnapped by a bank robber who is currently evading the police on his high-speed motorcycle. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, the story in this manga, or at least in the first chapter, is very much just stuff happening, you know? There's honestly not a ton of weight or intrigue in what's going on. Stuff's just sort of happening for the sake of it, and honestly, that's kind of what I've come to expect with a lot of these younger audience-oriented manga. I've read the Splatoon manga from CoroCoro Comic, and I do enjoy it, but it does have a similar vibe of just being like, kind of simple. Perhaps it goes without saying, but this children's manga is not the most thought-provoking thing of all time. Of course, none of us are really reading this manga to find out about the intricacies of Yuta's life, and sure enough, the next thing you know, who else comes running up but Sonic the Hedgehog to challenge this evildoer to a race. This is probably the biggest thing you're gonna hear people talk about online, and generally the best thing about the manga. Sonic is characterized so incredibly well in this story. Yuki Yamada really captures Sonic's carefree, cool, free-spirited attitude in just such a nice and succinct way. And it really reminds me of like Sonic and the Black Knight or even like Sonic X, you know? He just has such a fun, cool attitude, and it really takes you back to that sort of era of Sonic, and he has some really great lines in here. After he challenges this guy to a race, the criminal, he takes a huge head start ahead of Sonic, and Sonic just kneels down and says, "That enough of a handicap for you?" And that goes so hard, especially with the imagery and the art, which is really, really solid. There's some really nice posing on Sonic here. Less so for some of the background characters. I feel like they look kind of goofy and out of place, although I feel like that's kind of the point. But Sonic and as Yuta as well, I'd say, are drawn really well and they look really cool. Anyways, Sonic, of course, wins the race by a mile, clearing that gap in an instant, shocking both Yuta and the criminal. And they actually almost end up getting into a crash before Sonic saves them from, you know, an exploding motorcycle. I don't know how that thing really exploded when they just kind of hit a pebble, but whatever. Another funny thing about this interaction, Sonic doesn't seem to even realize or acknowledge that this was a kidnapping situation, as he seems to only have thought that this was like some sort of fun race. And that's another thing that I think this manga does really well, and is a fun aspect of Sonic's personality that doesn't get explored that much. He's a bit aloof. He's kind of just looking for fun adventures wherever he can find them, and sometimes that makes him not realize how dangerous the situation is. And that's not really a side of Sonic's personality that we get to see a whole lot, and it's really fun when it's put on display in stuff like this. It's after this that Sonic and Yuta get to know each other, and Sonic finds out how Yuta likes to help people and how he gets sort of bullied by other kids for being kind of slow. And that's also when he realizes that Yuta has what he's looking for, the Blade of Courage. He explains to Yuta that his necklace is the legendary Blade of Courage, which is supposed to curb one and all if the user has enough courage. Yuta is thinking about the legend and about what Sonic said on the train ride home, and is thinking about how, well, he doesn't have any courage. He thinks of himself as a coward, and so he doesn't believe that he could draw out the power of the Blade of Courage. Of course, in that moment, the entire train is taken hostage by the same guy from earlier who kidnapped Yuta. And I don't mean to harp on it, but once again, this is kind of just contrived kids manga stuff, just sort of things happening for no reason. The actual plot of this thing is just not really that interesting, and I'd argue Yuta himself also isn't that interesting. I don't know, there's not really much compelling about a kid who's just like, oh, I don't have courage, I'm not brave, because I'm sure we can all imagine what's about to happen in the next like 15 pages. Anyways, yet again, as you might imagine, Sonic the Hedgehog appears to save the day. He uses his supersonic speed to help people get off the train, and you get this really cool panel sequence where the villain, the kidnapper, is saying that he's gonna make the train, everyone's coughing and they're all screaming and crying, and then you just get this really cool panel of Sonic looking all confident. And I feel like it's not technically writing, like he's not saying anything obviously, but it is sort of in the writing and in the portrayal of Sonic with how they draw him and his attitude that feels so damn cool in this manga. He just looks sick. Now that Sonic has taken everyone safely off the train, except for Yuta, I guess, the villain decides to do something drastic and smashes the main control panel for the train so that it is on a crash course to the station and is just gonna murder, suicide everyone, I guess, because he's mad. Seriously, what is this guy's like, what is his goal? He went from robbing a bank to kidnapping a child to mass hostaging a train to then, yes, murder suiciding an entire train station. Like, I don't know, couldn't you have like taken the money and then like gone home? I get that it's just a kid's manga, but this is just like really lazy writing in my opinion, and I'm not really a fan of it. And it's like the main point of contention for me and this manga, because I generally like everything else that's going on, but this villain is just like so lame and so uninteresting. Anyways, Sonic uses some rope to tie up the bad guy, and Yuta actually goes to find his bully who was hiding in the restroom and manages to have him evacuate out of the train. And he also actually goes to the train radio and tells everyone in the station to evacuate. Of course, with the controls being busted, there's no real way to stop the train at this point, so Sonic decides to run out in front of the train and try and push it back from the front to maybe stop it. However, the train is just too heavy for Sonic to push back on his own. If it was at a stopping point, he could use his speed to push it back, but since it's moving so fast and it's so heavy, there's not much he can do, and so he asks Yuta to use the Blade of Courage to try and help slow the thing down. Yuta, as you can imagine, breaks down. He says, "No, I can't do it. I'm a coward, you don't understand." And in classic shonen fashion, Sonic gives him the courage-inducing pep talk, which allows him to use the Blade of Courage to stab it into the ground of the train and slow it down just enough for Sonic to stop the train. And so the train station is safe, all of the passengers on the train were safely evacuated, and all is well. And so Yuta tries to congratulate Sonic and tell him how great of a job he did and how amazing he is. And Sonic turns it back around on Yuta and says, "No, this isn't just me, this is both of us who did this." He helps Yuta up and he says, "We were running at different speeds. That's why we were able to save everything." And I just love that little line. I feel like it captures the message of this first chapter really nicely. And it's also kind of an interesting sort of moral lesson to put onto the audience. I think the classic shonen sort of motivational hype message that the audience tends to be given would be something more like, oh, you too can run at Sonic speed. You too can become fast enough to save everyone. But this is doing something a little bit more interesting. It's saying, you don't need to be exactly like Sonic. You don't need to be super fast and always adrenaline pumped and whatever. You have your own things, your own abilities, your own traits that are unique to you, and things that only you can do with those traits.
There's things that only I can do.
And it's why Sonic says, you know, it's your slower speed that actually helped at the end of the day, and it's my high speed that helped in some other areas, and it's together that they managed to do that. I just think that's really nice. It's really cute. When they could have easily done the thing of like, Yuta, you can also go fast, you know what I mean? After that, Yuta goes home and reflects on the day and the crazy adventure he had, only for Sonic to show up at his window and ask him if he wants to save the world. And that is the end of Chapter 1 of Sonic and the Blade of Courage, with a bit of a cliffhanger to yet to be determined, you know, future chapters. So looking at it as a whole, overall, I really enjoyed this chapter. I thought it was a really fun start to this brand new manga series. So when you look at the reaction online, I would probably say that people are overhyping it just a touch. You know, this is a very kiddie manga, very silly, wacky, not really amazing storytelling, but I do think it has some of the best Sonic writing and some of the most cool character moments for Sonic that we've seen in quite a while, and I think that's kind of why people are so excited about this. It's because Sonic himself is done so well in this little comic. He's written so well that people are kind of overlooking how bland the main villain is, and even Yuta to a certain extent, he's kind of just a self-insert for the kid readers to imagine themselves as. But again, Sonic just kind of saves this entire manga. He's so cool, he's written so well, and it really does remind me of that Sonic X, Sonic and the Black Knight era of Sonic, where he was just kind of cool and confident, and it's a really nostalgic kind of read. It feels like it could have came out way back then. I personally wouldn't call this like peak Sonic media or whatever, as some other people are saying, but I do think it's like peak Sonic characterization, and I'm really excited to see where the story goes next, because I feel like getting out of this like little city area with the train and stuff, like that kind of storytelling, getting out into more cool locations could open up the story to some more fun writing and more interesting scenarios, and maybe even introduce other characters like Tails and Knuckles, and seeing how they would be written is also really exciting. So yeah, overall, I'm just really looking forward to more chapters of this thing, and I hope you guys are too, and maybe even looking forward to more reviews of the next chapters. I don't know, we'll see how this video does. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, click that like button, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, because again, there are more chapters coming out. I could do more videos like this if you guys want me to. And also let me know what you thought of the first chapter of Sonic and the Blade of Courage, if you've read it, if you really loved it, if there were other things about it that you didn't like as much, let me know down below. And yeah, once again, thank you guys so much. I'll see you all later. Peace.